Yeah,
But we are joined by boxing media pundit and author, Mr. Ben Doughty. How are you, my friend? Welcome back.
I'm good, guys. How's it going?
All good.
Yeah, you're
friend.
up, Ben.
All good. Thank you for joining us, mate. Thank you for finding the time. We appreciate it as always. Got a big boxing fight next week with Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant. Is this only going one way?
I'd be surprised if Plant pulled off the upset, Simon, but I don't think he's going to get annihilated like some people are predicting. You know, you see a lot of... I think sometimes a fighter assumes this reputation as a destroyer, perhaps a bit disingenuously, you know, when people don't really think it through. And I think Canelo, you know, I mean, he wasn't extended by Paul Smith, but he had to work, you know, another tall fighter who knew his way around the ring. He had to go to 12 rounds at least. It was a bit of a steady kind of one-sided beating. And I think Canelo doesn't tend to destroy decent world-class opposition, you know, early doors. So Plant, do you know what? Plant looks like he studies Floyd Mayweather, and I'm pretty sure he'll be watching a lot of the Mayweather-Canelo fight, however much dwindling relevance it might have, being as it happened, you know, like 8 years ago. But I see certain Mayweatherisms and tributes to Mayweather in Plant's style, with the kind of with the chin tucked into the shoulder, with the low left hand, the kind of that so-called check hook, the counter left hook, and the pivot and all the rest of it. The way he kind of waves the left hand upstairs and then throws that quick stab jab to the body. I think he pretty likes Floyd, you know, and I think he's probably studied him a lot. And he probably will be, as long ago as it was, might be basing his kind of game plan on that kind of approach. You know, the only guy to beat Canelo officially. So, but you know what? No, I'm not predicting the upset. I think Canelo is too formidable, too good. He seems to be in the prime of his life. I just don't think that Plant is going to get completely steamrolled. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I wouldn't say I was 100% sort of up with Caleb Plant as a fighter. I'm kind of looking to you, I suppose, as our resident boxing expert, to sort of tell us a bit more about Caleb Plant. Like, he's an undefeated fighter for a reason. Like, he's not a bum, which I saw someone describe him as yesterday on Twitter, which is obviously not the best gauge for you know, fighters. But like you've just said there, he's not. You don't think he's going to get steamrolled, but no one seems to be giving him much of a chance. Reese just said in the chat, he said, I'm really looking forward to Canelo and Plant. I think Canelo will win, but I don't write off Caleb Plant.
Me neither. You know, I mean, Caleb Plant, the thing that's interesting to me is he's a white American fighter. I mean, he looks a bit, I mean, I mentioned this the other day on Facebook. I said, if he does pull off the, you know, what some people regard as the unthinkable, sure, it'll be the greatest achievement by a white American boxer this century. With the only thing I could think of that might rival that was Jermaine Taylor, you know, being beaten twice by Kelly Pavlik. Okay, but the reason why that interests me is simply because I've always found it a little bit mystifying. Whatever happened to the white American boxer? It's not something. I mean, some people get a bit uneasy when you start talking about race, you know, or anything to do with ethnicity in this day and age. But honestly, when you look at the old era, you know, when you had guys like Harry Greb, Benny Leonard, Mickey Walker, and then latterly you had like Joaquin Marcianos and Jake LaMotta's, and a whole host of other great, you know, and Jack Dempsey and et cetera, et cetera. For some reason, the whole gentrification of the white American males seems to be so all-consuming and total that they literally haven't produced anything for decades. If I asked you, could you name an all-time great white American? I know they come from various heritages like Italian backgrounds and Jewish and all the rest of it, but regardless, we're talking about Caucasians, right? Could you name me a great white American fighter since Jake LaMotta, who was a little bit after Rocky Marciano in terms of his activity, with Marciano retiring in 1956, you know? And before you make your points, the answer is you can't, yeah. And I just think it's interesting because in the UK we produce talent pretty much down the middle. I would say, you know, we have black fighters, we have white fighters. Obviously, they're from the more kind of working class backgrounds. That's just the way it is. Boxers do not come from the gated communities of Chelsea, you know, at high level, and I'm guessing they never will. But we seem to produce talent across the ethnic demographics, you know, and we have Asian lads that do well as well. We have the travelling community that have done very well in recent years. Whereas in America, the white American male has just completely dropped off. So it interests me that Plant is there at all, in a sense, you know, because it's certainly not. it's not cultural, and it's not. It doesn't seem to be sociological for that to happen. So, you know, I think he's had a hard upbringing. A lot of people have have spoken about his story of tragedy and loss. He lost his mother died tragically. His daughter died, which obviously is always a tragedy. No parent should see their children buried. And it has been mentioned, you know, that what a rocky story it would be if he can beat Canelo, because a lot of people have taken to him because of the adversity and tragedies he's suffered.
Course, yeah.
And you know what I mean? The man can fight. You know, I mean, you probably saw the handbag situation when he took a swipe at Canelo, and Canelo got the best of it because he lay back and then went 1-2, and then he drew blood or whatever. You know what? Some people are even basing his right implant off based on that, which I think is ludicrous. They're saying, you could just see. I mean, I realise not everybody has to be Einstein, and some people are saying you could just see Canelo's reflexes. He's much better and quicker and more powerful. But one thing I would say is let's put that to one side. That is not relevant at all, you know. But you know, he hasn't fought anything. He's only had 21 fights. He hasn't fought anything like the level of competition that Canelo has. He quite impressively beat the guy Caleb Truex, who got an upset win over James DeGale in 2017, and then was defeated in the rematch by Junkie. But I just think he's got self-belief. I think the important thing, at least, is he thinks he can beat Canelo, which I think will help to make him competitive for a little while. I mean, but ultimately, I just think, you know, you can say what you like about Canelo, but at the end of the day, he's a damn good fighter, isn't he? I don't believe he's only lost once. I think he's lost at least once, one other time when the other guy didn't get his hand raised. But Canelo right now, he just seems to be that consummate fighter. When you slow his fights down and you watch his technique, he's just really damn good at the minute. And the other thing about him is he just seems to be so focused. You never hear of Canelo getting into trouble or, you know, kind of extracurricular activities. And I just don't think there's anybody in that division who can beat him right now. And I don't make Plant the exception to that.
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting in terms of, if not Plant, who, almost the question becomes, because like you say, there's no one who really stands out that you think, you know, that person could beat Canelo. And what I think in Canelo's, certainly in recent years, he just looks like he gets better, and he's just at a different level. And I think sometimes in certain divisions in MMA and in boxing, you do get these kind of fighters who are just stand out. They stand out above everyone else in the division. However, I was just having a look at like Caleb Plant to see if he had fought anyone, you know, of real sort of to really test it and top level. There's no one that sticks out. In terms of your question about American white fighters, Reese David Evans says, what about Mickey Ward?
Well, quite. Yeah, what about Mickey Ward? Well, yeah, he was kind of a glorified club fighter made good. Don't get me wrong, I love Mickey Ward, and his trilogy with Arturo Gatti is part of the annals of the sport, you know. And I was actually at one of those fights, the second one, lucky enough to be there live. And I think Mickey Ward, every time I heard him speak about boxing, he's a great guy, but he's nowhere near an all-time great fighter. And anybody who thinks he is, that would just be a most ridiculous perception to have. Mickey Ward had 13 losses. All right, by simply saying that doesn't tell the story, because I could name you a whole bunch of all-time great fighters who lost more. But Mickey Ward had 13 losses at a certain level, you know, 13 or 14, I believe. And you know what Mickey Ward was a fringe world-class guy, you would call him. He was a great pressure fighter, a very tough guy, very honourable guy, and he was a wicked body puncher. But he wasn't quite as good as Arturo Gatti, who was a world-class fighter and a multi-weight world champion. But he had a very good chemistry in the ring with Arturo Gatti, you know. But no, Mickey Ward is not at all. Like, so I don't think you can name an all-time great American fighter of the last 60 years. I defy anybody to do it. There just hasn't been one. The Mickey Ward certainly wouldn't be the answer. Kelly Pavlik, who looked like he was going to be that kind of one of the big figures in boxing for a while, but things seemed to go wrong. I heard he had a backstory of alcoholism and such, and then he kind of dropped off. Obviously, his thing was getting ruined by Bernard Hopkins, you know, who Jermaine Taylor had beaten twice. It kind of goes around, it comes around. But the only other thing people might say, just to get this, some people, I believe technically Mexicans and such are actually Caucasian, but in boxing terms, they talk about black fighters, white fighters, and Latino fighters in the American gyms, certainly in New York. And obviously, when you talk about guys like Canelo, I know Canelo looks kind of white and Irish and all the rest of it. In boxing terms, I think of them as Latins. I'm not. Maybe I was a professor of what is the science of of the different kind of races and ethnicities, eugenics or something, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's what
I'd probably be on shaky ground in that academic format. But in boxing, they say there was a guy called Tyrone Crawley once in the 80s who was waiting for a tune-up on a TV. I think it was ESPN, and he said he was black himself, but he said he wouldn't fight a black fighter because he didn't think there was this prejudice amongst black fighters that they're the best, and he said he wouldn't fight a black fighter for this particular date for a tune-up. He said, but he'd fight a Latin or maybe a white, was what he said to the TV company. So the only reason I mention that, other than it being amusing, is that if anybody gets on the stream now and says, what about Oscar de la Hoya? I would say, no, the thing is, Oscar de la Hoya is a Latin. I'm talking about people who are kind of, pale like myself and
yes. Well,
plenty of sun and all the rest of it.
I just Googled it to see if I could find someone.
Yeah.
I didn't.
And I'm saying, Simon and Danny, isn't it weird? Because we've got Joe Calzaghe, we've had Carl Froch, we've got Ricky Hatton, and we've got Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn and Prince Nassim Hamed. And Frank Bruno was an all-time great, but I think we've got a nice even.
Khan you could have thrown in there, up until probably.
Do you know what I mean? When you look at the legendary British fighters of Lennox Lewis, even I know some people argue he wasn't British, and that's where it all gets interesting. It's not. This is not about race, in any kind of heavy way, and it's not about nationality. It's just fun. People's different perceptions of things. But I think in the UK, we've got a pretty nice melting pot of different kinds of people. In America, I'm just saying, that it's like literally every white American male has moved into marketing or computers or finance or something, and they don't produce those kind of broken-nosed warriors, like Harry Greb anymore. They just
they're all doing MMA, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think you make
Is that true?
You make a really interesting point, though, Ben. I don't think there's anything shameful to talk about ethnicity in terms of potential advantages, and because genetically they are very, very slightly different in that a lot of the black community, we're predominantly talking about males here, they have a slimmer bone structure, a slimmer muscularity to the lower half of their body, so they can hold a lot more proportion of their weight on the upper portion of their body, so more muscled, and they can be predominantly more fast muscle twitch. And look, you're never going to see, or you will probably never see an Olympian black swimmer succeed. There ain't any. Their ethnicity just doesn't function well in cold climates of the water. So I don't think it's shameful to discuss it.
It's just
I
shaky
think
ground, isn't it? When you get to a certain point,
it can be if you're going to get offended by it. But look, there are advantages. Look, the Ethiopians and long distance runners like that. You're getting Kenyans, and they're running incredibly fast. Almost
long distance,
unbelievable times. Long distance running, the world records dropping that. They're nearly down to 2 hour, 26-mile runs. I mean, you'll be lucky to be able to run 200 meters at the pace they're running 26 miles. And, it's because they've got a larger lung capacity. They're less muscled on the lower portion of their body. And whereas Caucasian people, we're much more heavily muscled, shorter legged from the waist down. You're just genetically, mildly different, and at the extreme sports that gets exposed. And maybe as well, Ben, particularly with America, there's a lot of obviously poverty in the black community. I think, what is it? There's a 6% of the population of America is black male, American black male. And so they come up from these ghettos and these slums, so they're kind of brought up rough and ready. Maybe it's the positioning of the boxing places. It could be that.
That was always the case in the 1970s and 80s and earlier even, and you saw, so many great black American fighters in those decades. They're still strong in the sport these days, but the black American community, or their kind of demographic in boxing, has dropped off a little bit because their community has become more gentrified, and there's been a kind of degree of social economic uplift, where there are more options than simply fighting your way out of the slums, as you put it. And we've seen the rise of the Eastern Europeans, because white Eastern Europeans we've seen, which wasn't a factor back in the 80s. See, I think I mentioned this to you guys before, that Bob Arum gave an interview in the 80s, late 80s, to KO magazine, and he said, "You keep saying white American." You keep saying white guys can't fight. He said, "White American guys can't fight." He said, "White Russians can, trust me." And he said, "And they're going to be a major force in the next 20 years when certain things change in the communist countries." So it is odd, like I say, I believe that people say that the reason why there weren't America wasn't producing quite so many black great American fighters anymore was because of things like basketball, other sports which are more lucrative, and also because of gentrification and more kind of academic-based careers as well. So, but either way, perhaps we shouldn't get too far off the track of whether Caleb Plant is capable of beating Canelo Alvarez, regardless of what colour he is. I don't see it, but I just think it's interesting. I mean, he's a skilled guy, and he's a young guy who's got belief in himself. And I'm quite, I don't know about you, but I'm quite up for it. I'm looking forward to this next week. When Canelo fought that guy Yildirim, the Turkish guy, I had no interest in it whatsoever. This, I am interested in it. I want to see how it looks up and shakes up when they get in the ring. And I think Caleb Plant, he's got an interesting backstory. He's got an interesting style, and I think he's got enough skills and self-belief to make to have a go at least.
So
he's got interesting physical advantages as well, isn't he? He's like 6'1". He's got like a 4-inch reach advantage. I think if he can make his physicality, the differences to Canelo, if he can make that apparent in the ring, he could make an interesting battle of it. I just think it's a case of, fighting smart with who and what you are. And, has got some advantages there. He just needs to perhaps just put it into play well on the night, so to speak.
The only thing
I think that'd be interesting.
When you talk about physical advantages and height and reach, Danny, immediately I think of Callum Smith. I think I said Paul Smith earlier. I meant Callum Smith. I think of Callum Smith and the physical advantages he had, and now he's since moved up to light heavyweight, and it didn't seem to do him any good at all, did it? I think Canelo doesn't mind a taller guy. It's he is beyond the pest master at getting past the jab and slipping punches and working the body. So I'm not sure if they will prove to be a massively telling physical advantage on the night. I think Plant's skills and his IQ is his best bet, regardless of him being long and tall, really.
So Ben, just to very quickly finish this off, there's a really interesting question from Reese, which I want to put to you in a minute. But first of all, as someone who likes to have the odd bet on an outsider, some of the betting for next week's boxing is that you could have Saul Alvarez in the first 3 rounds, 8-1, or you can have Caleb Plant in the first 3 rounds, 50-1, and then obviously it's like 50 for Plant. It's basically 50-1, and you can have rounds 1-3, 4-6, 7-9. Like if Caleb Plant was to win, how do you see him winning? If he was able to pull it off the middle, as it were.
It would have to be on points, and I would be inclined to if people wanted to make it this specific, to bet on a split decision or a majority decision. The difference being a majority decision is when one card is given as a draw, whereas a split decision when you've got the 2-1 breakdown of the winner. But I don't see Canelo getting stopped. I really don't. I mean, I know anybody can get cut with a punch, which is, but with in a way that is adjudged to come from a punch, a legitimate punch, which means they declared the loser, if it happens in that kind of time frame. I think Canelo seems to have an iron jaw as well, and I don't think, you've seldom seen him troubled in the ring, really. I mean, he fought Golovkin twice and went toe-to-toe with him the second time. Never looked like he was out of sorts for a moment. Can't see Plant stopping him. So I think it would have to be points. And here's the other thing. People talk about, the big kind of sacred cow that Canelo is, and it's very hard to get a decision against him. Quite honestly, I really thought Miguel Cotto beat him. I know it's not my most popular opinion, but I do believe that. I thought that Golovkin definitely beat him the first time. I thought Erislandy Lara many years ago, and it is a long time ago now, I admit, at light middleweight, I thought he beat him. Austin Trout was close, but I don't mind Canelo winning that. Second Golovkin fight, I thought Canelo... It really could have gone either way, but I didn't think it was an outrageous robbery. I thought Canelo did well in that fight, and I don't have a huge problem with him getting the decision, to be honest with you. But I think he lost. The thing is, when he lost to Floyd Mayweather, one of the judges' cards was drawn, as you may know, so that was a majority decision, which is that's just off the scale. I mean, it has to be corruption, because I don't think anybody you could think of the most clueless combat sports person of your acquaintanceship, of your casual acquaintance. I think they could have figured out that Mayweather won that fight, So you know what? It has to be on points, but that it's very hard to get a decision against Saul Canelo Alvarez, isn't it? Because he's a big commercial animal.
Yes. I think it needs to be almost like a very clear victory to get that decision because they don't want him to lose. They want him to keep winning and keep going on, of course. So, yeah, just to finish us off then, Reese said, I wanted to ask Ben, does he have any stories about Shannon Briggs? He was an absolute character outside the ring, and I wanted to see if Ben had any stories about him.
Do you know what? I've not really crossed paths with Shannon Briggs. I remember because to be honest, it really turned me off all that "Let's Go Champ" thing and the reinvention. To me, that was a total social media phenomenon where he kind of, got this kind of dumb slogan that people started chanting in their thousands at one point. He'd come to Britain for whatever reason, and he was following the Klitschko's around, wasn't he, and stalking them. That was something he was doing. It was that long ago. Then he'd come to Britain, and there'd be people mobbing him in Liverpool, saying "Let's go, champ." And the whole thing really got on my nerves a little bit. I thought his relevance was restricted to the 90s, really. But I know it's an interesting. If Reece fancies watching something, there's an interesting documentary. It's called Welcome to the Sewer, and it's about boxing. I believe that's the one. And it focuses partly on Shannon Briggs and his relationship with his manager, Michael Marley, and it's in the early days. And it also deals with the Larry Holmes versus Evander Holyfield fight and such. But Briggs is featured in it quite a lot. But I remember Briggs' first loss, he lost to a fellow called Darryl Wilson, and he blamed it on an asthma attack. I do remember that. I remember he said that there was no way he could have run out of gas, but what it was, he'd been running... He said he'd been running in a warm place like California where he'd been training. And when he got to a cold place where the fight was, I believe, in Atlantic City, the culture shock for his lungs or, allergies or whatever played up. And he said he was stricken with an asthma attack mid-fight, and that's the only reason he incurred his first loss. But I mean, I thought, but you know what? That we haven't had any particular face-to-face dealings. I can't say.
Cool. I've actually just dropped the YouTube link to Welcome to the Sewer in the Facebook chat if people would like to check that out afterwards. Ben, I know you're short for time, mate. I really appreciate you giving us some time, and I'm sure we'll get you back on soon to talk about it. Maybe if you're free next week, maybe we can have a chat about the fight. That'd be cool.
Next Sunday I will be chilling at my girlfriend's, and let's see how the fight goes, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Cheers, Ben.
Cheers,
appreciate
guys.
It, always.
Thank you, Ben.